Hello again, it's Alan Macon, the local history tutor for Knowsley Face, with a continuing series of short videos on the local history of Liverpool and Merseyside. Today's short video is entitled Liverpool's Multi-Storey Housing, which in Liverpool was known as the tenements. It will trace the history of Liverpool's tenements from the 1930s to the present day. We'll look at some archive photographs, hopefully brings back some memories, and the reason they were introduced in the first place, and their eventual decline in the 1980s when the vast majority was demolished in Liverpool. So we'll start off by looking at various photographs of various tenements or gardens as they were known in Liverpool. Examples would be Fontenoy Gardens, Warwick Gardens, Gerard Gardens, St Andrew's Gardens, Myrtle Gardens, all tenements that could be found in various parts of Liverpool, the north end, the city centre and the south end of Liverpool. So I'd just like to zoom in. We'll have a look at an example of a tenement known famously as Fontenoy Gardens in Liverpool city centre. As the article says, the tenements, euphemistically named Fontenoy Gardens, is a good example, but the name gardens, I say rather euphemistically, typically without a blade of grass. This is an example of a city centre, Fontenoy Gardens from 1965. So I'm just going to zoom in and have a better look. So hopefully everyone's got memories of Fontenoy Gardens. This is what they looked like way back in 1963, nearly 60 years ago. The tenements, the houses or the flats on top and shops underneath, right in the Liverpool city centre. Most of this buildings in this particular picture have disappeared to be replaced over time. Liverpool's truly been transformed over many, certainly in the last 20 years. So the reasons for these multi-storey housing can be traced back not just to Liverpool or Britain, to the continent as well. There was a movement for better housing for the poorer people, and Liverpool, along with other cities, was a pioneer in this multi-storey housing. The gentleman in Liverpool who was a driving force behind it was known as Lancelot Kay. So the article goes on to say, Liverpool architect Lancelot Kay, was born in the late Victorian period and died only in 1974. He was the driving force influenced by German and Austrian architects, and particularly what was in vogue at the time is Art Nouveau style, behind Liverpool's drive for multi-storey housing schemes, which included St Andrew's Gardens, which still exist, the only last surviving example, 1935, Myrtle Gardens, Carl Gardens, Warwick Gardens and Sir Thomas White Gardens in the Everton district. So writing just on the eve of the Second World War, Lancelot Kay said Kay proudly enumerated the facilities of Carl Gardens. So he's describing Carl Gardens. He said they had rest rooms for aged tenants, playgrounds with a liberal supply of gymnastic equipment for both infants and juniors, and gas heated drying room with no charge. So this was quite a revolutionary step for social housing or working class housing at the time. A lot of people in Liverpool before that had lived in courts for very poor housing, something I've covered in previous videos. So I'll give you an example. This is Warwick Gardens in the south end of Liverpool. So these are the examples. These were still standing till the 1980s, Art Deco style, shops underneath. And in some of these tenements, not all of them by any means, you had examples of Warwick. This is an example, Warwick Garden Children's Meal Centre to feed the children, which was generally lots of them in these particular buildings. So we continue the theme of the tenements. This is an example of a famous Gerard Gardens, again in Liverpool city centre. This particular picture is from 1966, not far from the Liverpool World Museum, right in the city centre. And it became famous in terms of films because a film called The Violent Playground, which I'll explain in a minute. So just a better look at the children's playground with swings, to keep them off the street. At the time, it was seen as a revolutionary step forward, instead of the kids playing on the streets and dirty gutters of the courts. If you zoom out again, so it goes on to say, 62 years ago, 1958, Gerard Gardens appeared in the famous film Violent Playground, which still appears on the television now and again, starring famous at the time Stanley Baker, Peter Cushing, Anne Hayward and David McCallum. David McCallum is about 90 now, as far as I know, he's still alive. The movie dealt with street gangs and youth crime. Other examples would be St Oswald Gardens, it's on the left, and Hearst Gardens. The particular picture from 1979 in the Old Swan area, not far from the Tesco's in the Old Swan area. So there you can see other examples of Liverpool tenements, just 41 years ago. We continue the theme of the tenements. These are two famous, another example, should I say, of the Bull Ring, better known as, or officially known as, St Andrew's Gardens. These are good examples, or it's a good example because the St Andrew's Gardens, the Bull Ring as they're locally known, are being turned into flats and renovated for the students of Liverpool University. So this is what they look like back in their heyday, the 1960s, St Andrew's Gardens, they were officially known as. Today, they've been renovated in the last 10-15 years, and the hundreds of Liverpool University students are accommodated there. Other examples will be Myrtle Gardens, but just to finish off and say, St Andrew's Gardens was designed by John Hughes back in 1932, completed in 1935, so it still survives. The development included what was euphemistically known as sun balconies in the British weather. Other examples in the Edge Hill area of Liverpool would be Myrtle Gardens, two photographs, one from 1970s, one from when it was a brand new building with cobbled streets and no cars, or very few cars. So I'll just zoom in, give you an example of Myrtle Gardens in the Edge Hill area of Liverpool. Do you have any memories of these? And the brand new state-of-the-art Art Deco style 1930s example, seen as a revolutionary step forward when they were introduced. And also other examples of Myrtle Gardens. This one's from 1969, nice colour version. Were you there in 1969? Did you live in the area? Have you got any memories? Again, relatively few cars on the streets compared to modern day, 50 years later. Other example of tenements in Liverpool, the Everton area of Liverpool. This is known as the Sir Thomas White Gardens. So you can just give you an example. Famous because in the late 40s, Paul McCartney's lived here before the family moved to Speke. So Paul McCartney's family lived here. So they were known as the Sir Thomas White Garden. This is an example from 1973. Everton, famous St Domingo Road. And Sir Thomas White gave it his name because he was a Liverpool famous councillor at the time, Sir Thomas White. That's where the name comes from. Lastly, I'd just like to have a quick look at other examples. This is Carl Gardens, and a photograph from 1975, 45 years ago. Again, good example of tenements, all been knocked down since. I'll just zoom in, show you an example. Did you live in this area? Did you live in one of these flats? Have you got any memories? Were they happy memories? So the reasons for the decline and eventual demolition of these tenements is a relatively complicated one. So I'd just like to sum up and say the reasons for the decline and demolition of so many of Liverpool's multi-storey housing is complex and evolving. The loss of a large chunk of Liverpool's population in the 70s and 80s certainly didn't help. The people of Liverpool desired better housing, and the younger generation moved out to start families elsewhere. All British cities have similar stories to tell. Do you have any stories to tell? So as usual, could you please leave any comments and any memories on the website. Please stay tuned to Knowsley Face and Knowsley Recovery websites for tips on mental health and well-being. Thank you.